The automatic blood pressure cuff on my left arm squeezed so tight it felt like a heavy leather tourniquet cutting off my circulation. I was sitting on that crinkly white paper they put over the examination tables in a brightly lit clinic room here in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring down at the gray linoleum floor while the machine hummed and clicked its mechanical rhythm. My cardiologist, a sharp-looking man at least 20 years younger than me, watched the digital monitor with a frown. I saw his jaw tighten before he even opened his mouth to say the numbers aloud. 162 over 85. He sighed, pulled out his prescription pad from his white coat, and told me he was increasing the dosage of my daily water pills and adding an entirely new medication to the two I was already faithfully taking. He told me to watch my salt intake more carefully. He told me, with that polite but dismissive tone doctors sometimes use, that this was simply a normal, expected part of getting older. I'm 81 years old now. I was born back in Columbus, Ohio in 1944. I grew up in a time and a place where men like my father spent their entire adult lives working on the concrete floors of manufacturing plants. They breathed in industrial fumes, carried impossibly heavy loads, and completely ignored the tightness in their chests or the ringing in their ears until a massive, sudden heart attack took them away from us far too early. I spent my own career working in community health education, standing in front of church groups and community centers, trying to translate complicated medical jargon into simple, concrete terms that working folks could actually understand and use to protect themselves. Because of that background, I always believed I was paying close attention to my health. I always thought I was doing all the right things to keep my engine running smoothly. But sitting in that cold clinic, holding a piece of paper with yet another prescription scribbled on it, I felt completely defeated and entirely helpless. I went home that afternoon and did exactly what the doctor ordered to the letter. I threw away my salt shaker. I stopped eating anything that came out of a can. I started eating boiled chicken breast and steamed vegetables that tasted like wet paper. I religiously took the higher dose of the diuretic, the water pill, which essentially chained me to the bathroom all day long and ruined any chance of taking a long walk or driving across town. And the frustrating result of all this daily misery was almost entirely invisible. My pressure would drop a few measly points, maybe down to 150, but I was constantly exhausted. I was lightheaded and dizzy every time I stood up from my armchair to answer the phone. My feet were constantly cold. I felt like a tired man desperately bailing water out of a sinking rowboat with a teaspoon, knowing deep down that the leak in the hull was only getting worse. About 3 weeks into this miserable new regimen, I was on the phone with my daughter Laura. Laura is a registered nurse over in Phoenix. She has seen thousands of patients in her career, she has read the charts, and she has absolutely zero tolerance for lazy or outdated medical protocols. I told her how bone-tired I was. I told her I was genuinely afraid my heart was just wearing out like a cheap pump, and that my future would consist of swallowing a handful of different colored pills every morning just to stay alive. Laura listened to me complain patiently, and then she told me something that completely shattered everything I thought I knew about blood pressure. She told me that the standard medical advice I was killing myself trying to follow was based on an incomplete plumbing theory from 50 years ago. The old idea is that high blood pressure is just too much fluid volume inside the pipes. If you have too much water in a closed system, the pressure naturally goes up against the walls. So the doctor tells you to cut the salt and take a diuretic to forcefully flush the water out through your kidneys. The fluid volume goes down, the pressure reading drops, and the doctor claps his hands and says the problem is solved. But Laura explained that this framework completely ignores the actual physical pipes themselves. The problem was not that I simply had too much fluid in my circulatory system. The real problem was that my arteries, the vital pipes carrying my blood, were damaged, rigid, and physically deteriorating at a microscopic cellular level. The human body does not ask for things twice in the same way. When you ignore structural damage for years, it eventually finds a way to slide the bill across the table. Laura explained that my arteries were not just passive rubber hoses carrying liquid. They are highly complex, living, breathing tissues. When a cardiac surgeon cuts into a healthy artery, it is highly elastic. It springs back immediately. But when they cut into the artery of someone with chronic hypertension, someone exactly like me, it feels like cutting into solid bone. It is stiff. It is calcified. That rigidity, that severe loss of flexibility is the true root cause of what high blood pressure actually represents. And no water pill in the world can fix a rigid, calcified pipe. I hung up the phone with Laura and sat in my quiet living room for a long time, watching the dust motes float in the sunlight. I realized that the medications were just artificially manipulating the numbers on the monitor to make the doctor happy, but my vessels were still physically damaged and vulnerable. They were still silently progressing toward a devastating stroke or a major heart attack. I decided right then that I needed to understand exactly what was actually breaking my pipes, and more importantly, how to repair the foundation before the whole house collapsed. Over the next few months, through long Sunday conversations with Laura and my son Daniel, who is a physical therapist up in Denver, and by staying up late reading research papers until my eyes watered, I dismantled my high blood pressure by addressing 4 specific invisible root causes. The first thing I had to fix was the delicate inner lining of my plumbing. Inside every single blood vessel in your body, there's a microscopic surface layer called the glycocalyx. Daniel described it to me perfectly. He said to think of it exactly like the non-stick Teflon coating inside a brand new frying pan. It is a smooth, incredibly slippery surface that lets the blood flow past without any resistance or friction. It actively stops inflammatory molecules and cholesterol from sticking to the vessel walls. But this non-stick coating is incredibly fragile. When your blood sugar spikes high after eating a heavy plate of pasta, a bowl of white rice, or a slice of bread, that excess sugar acts exactly like battery acid on the nonstick coating. It burns it right off. Once that protective coating is gone, the raw vessel wall is exposed. Cholesterol sticks to it like glue. Inflammation sets in deeply. The pipe gets narrow, irritated, and stiff. My doctor never once mentioned my nonstick coating. He only looked at the pressure reading. But my fasting blood sugar was running a little high, not officially diabetic, but definitely high enough to be stripping that protective layer away every single day after lunch. To rebuild it, I had to drastically change what I was eating, but not in the restrictive way you might think. I didn't just cut out the refined carbohydrates and the processed sugars. I started actively feeding my body the specific building blocks it uses to repair that coating. I started eating dark, colorful berries every single morning with my breakfast. I loaded my dinner plate with dark leafy greens. These specific foods contain powerful compounds called polyphenols. Polyphenols are basically premium rust-proof paint for your arteries. They neutralize the damage in the bloodstream and give the non-stick coating the space it needs to completely heal and rebuild itself. The second invisible cause I had to confront was the terrifying reality of what was actually making my arteries so hard and stiff. It was calcium. Back in Ohio, our old family house had original copper plumbing, and over the decades, the hard well water would deposit harsh minerals inside the pipes until they were choked off, narrowed, and extremely brittle. The exact same process happens inside the human body. Calcium belongs exclusively in your skeleton. It belongs safely locked away in your bones and your teeth. But as we age and as our blood vessels get chronically inflamed from a poor diet, the calcium gets confused. It migrates out of the bloodstream and embeds itself directly into the middle muscle layer of the artery walls. It crystallizes there. The smooth muscle literally begins to transform and behave like bone tissue. My arteries were literally calcifying, turning to stone. The expensive pills my doctor prescribed did absolutely nothing to pull that hardened calcium out of my artery walls. They just forcefully widened the stiff pipes for a few hours. To actually get the calcium out of the pipes and push it back into the bones where it belonged, I had to activate a specific traffic cop inside my body. That traffic cop is a protein, and its activation is entirely controlled by vitamin K2. I had lived 8 decades and never even heard of vitamin K2. But I learned that without it, calcium wanders around your body blindly and settles dangerously in your heart valves and your arteries. I started taking a daily supplement of vitamin K2 along with vitamin D to help absorb the calcium properly, and a strong dose of magnesium. Magnesium is nature's own pipe relaxer. It stops the calcium from crystallizing in the tissue. Within several months of sending that nutritional traffic cop back to work, my blood pressure numbers started to slowly, consistently drift downward. The third mechanism I had to repair was something Daniel brought up during a visit. It involves a critical gas molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the powerful chemical signal that your healthy arteries produce to tell the surrounding muscles to relax and dilate. When the pipes naturally open up, the pressure drops effortlessly. But when the inner lining of your arteries is damaged and inflamed, your natural production of this relaxing gas falls off a cliff. The pipes stay locked tight and constricted. You cannot just take a daily pill to make your body produce more nitric oxide permanently. You have to physically stimulate the blood vessels to wake up and start producing it again themselves. Daniel gave me a very specific, strange-sounding exercise protocol to fix this. It was not jogging for miles on hard pavement. It was not lifting heavy iron weights at a loud gym. It was an isometric hand grip routine. I drove to a local sporting goods store and bought a simple, heavy-duty rubber hand grip tool. 4 evenings a week, sitting right in my favorite armchair while watching the local evening news, I would squeeze that rubber grip at about 30% of my maximum strength. I would hold it tight and steady for exactly 2 minutes, rest for 1 minute, and repeat the process 4 times. Just the sustained physical friction of the blood pushing hard against the tense muscles while I held that grip was enough sheer stress to signal the enzymes in my arteries to wake up and start producing nitric oxide again. I also started making a conscious, deliberate effort to breathe strictly through my nose, even when walking around my neighborhood. The nasal passages naturally produce massive amounts of that same relaxing gas, far more than mouth breathing. It felt very unnatural at first, but it was physically retraining the biochemistry of my circulatory system. The fourth and final invisible cause was the biggest revelation of all because it perfectly explained why eating bland food and cutting out salt had never worked for me. Everyone blames the salt shaker for high blood pressure, but healthy kidneys are perfectly capable of filtering out excess salt, assuming they are receiving the right hormonal instructions. The hidden problem is that the kidneys are heavily commanded by the hormone insulin. When your insulin levels are chronically high, which happens when you eat constantly throughout the day or carry extra weight around your middle, that insulin sends a panic signal to your kidneys. It locks the doors. It forcefully instructs the kidneys to hoard and retain every single grain of sodium they can find. You can eat the absolute blandest, most depressing salt-free diet in the world, but if your insulin is elevated, your kidneys will stubbornly trap whatever tiny amount of sodium is there, and your blood pressure will stay dangerously high. The salt shaker was not my real enemy. My elevated insulin was the enemy. My fasting blood sugar looked fine on standard lab tests, so my doctor simply never bothered to check my insulin levels. To fix this dangerous retention, I had to unlock my kidneys. I did it by radically changing not just what I ate, but exactly when I ate. I instituted a strict daily eating window. I stopped snacking from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep. I started consuming all my daily meals within a condensed 8-hour window, usually between noon and 8 o'clock in the evening. For the other 16 hours of the day, I drank black coffee, plain water, or unsweetened tea. No calories. No insulin spikes. By giving my digestive system and my pancreas a 16-hour break every single day, my circulating insulin levels plummeted. The stubborn lock on my kidneys finally snapped open. My body began to naturally and effortlessly flush out the retained water and sodium that the heavy diuretic pills had been violently fighting for years. About 8 months after I started doing these 4 specific things, stabilizing my blood sugar to protect the non-stick coating, taking vitamin K2 and magnesium to pull the rusted calcium out of the pipes, using the isometric hand grip to produce nitric oxide, and eating in a narrow window to unlock my kidneys, I had another scheduled appointment with my cardiologist. I sat in the exact same chair in that brightly lit room. The nurse put the automatic cuff on my left arm. It squeezed tight. The machine hummed and clicked. The doctor walked in holding my chart just as the numbers flashed brightly on the digital screen. 118/74. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked closely at the monitor, looked down at my chart, and then looked intently at me. He immediately asked if I was feeling dizzy or faint, automatically assuming my prescribed medication was dangerously pushing my pressure too low. I told him the honest truth. I told him I felt better than I had in 20 years. I had the stable energy of a man a decade younger. The heavy brain fog was gone. My feet were warm again. He was genuinely confused. He could not believe the physical state of my arteries or the numbers he was seeing. Over the next 6 months, working very closely with him, we began to slowly and safely reduce my prescriptions. You never stop blood pressure medication cold turkey on your own. That is incredibly dangerous. You let your body do the healing, and you let the doctor verify the numbers to prove that the medication is no longer necessary. Today, I am entirely off the heavy diuretics and the calcium channel blockers. My pressure stays perfectly normal, anchored exactly where it should be, day after day. The independence you want tomorrow is protected by the small, quiet choices you make tonight. This is the central lesson I want to hand to you. The modern medical system we have is absolutely wonderful for acute emergencies. If you break your leg or have a sudden heart attack, the emergency room is exactly where you need to be. But when it comes to chronic, creeping conditions like high blood pressure, conventional medicine often only knows how to manage the numbers on a screen. They treat the superficial symptoms with daily pills for the rest of your life. They do not know how to reverse the deep structural damage. They do not treat the cracked foundation of the house. But you can. You can physically repair the pipes. You can restore the fragile non-stick coating. You can pull the hardened rust out of the lines. It requires consistent discipline. It requires saying no to the constant late-night snacking, making the deliberate effort to sit and squeeze that hand grip, and actively seeking out the specific nutrients your body is begging for. High blood pressure is not an inevitable permanent life sentence handed down by a judge just because you happen to be over 60 years old. It is a biological cry for help from a vascular system that is suffocating. Do not accept the depressing idea that your body is just wearing out and there is nothing you can do about it. The engine still wants to run smoothly. You just have to stop pouring sand into the gas tank and give the mechanics a chance to do their jobs. You still have time to turn this around. What you ignore today will absolutely limit what you can do tomorrow. This is Harold Bennett. Start tonight and take care of yourselves.